It was supposed to be a normal evening, the kind that comes and goes without leaving any mark. He had only planned to escort his friend home and then head out to play snooker. Nothing serious, nothing wild. His mind was already set on an easy night, a few games, a few laughs, and then back home. But life has a strange way of dragging people into stories they never planned to enter. On the way back, he saw four of his guys moving with the energy of people who were clearly heading somewhere louder and more exciting. They were dressed for the night, talking big, laughing hard, already carrying that restless club mood. That was all it took to scatter his original plan. Snooker suddenly felt too quiet, too ordinary. Since they were going his way, one of them gave him a lift on a bike, and together they rode back toward his side, the wind rushing against them as if the night itself was whispering that bigger things were ahead. Later, after they had gone on without him, his phone started lighting up with streak after streak. Videos came in from the club, bright lights, loud music, bottles on tables, boys posing, hands in the air, everyone looking like they owned the night. From the screen, it all looked perfect. It looked like enjoyment in its purest form. He watched with that mix of amusement and slight regret that comes when your guys are clearly having the kind of fun you almost joined. He had no idea that behind those flashy videos and loud laughter, the night was already preparing to turn ugly. By morning, reality looked very different. One of them texted him asking if he could send money for food, but he didn't have anything on him, so instead he decided to go and see them in person. He expected the usual morning after gist, the kind full of jokes, hangover complaints, and bragging. But when he got there, the atmosphere was off. The room carried the remains of stress. One guy looked rough and exhausted, another was still worked up, another kept laughing in that way people laugh when they've escaped something serious and still can't believe it. It was clear almost immediately that something had happened, something much bigger than ordinary club drama. Then they started talking, each one cutting in with his own version, each voice carrying pieces of the madness, and he realized the night they had posted online like a flex had nearly turned into a disaster. According to them, everything began from something so small that it should have ended in 2 seconds. In the middle of the club, packed with bodies, flashing lights, and music so loud it swallowed half of what people said, one of the boys mistakenly stepped on a stranger's shoe. It was the kind of thing that happens every weekend in a crowded place. Normally, it ends with a quick apology, maybe a small hiss, and then everybody moves on. But this time, before the apology could even settle properly, the stranger slapped him, just like that. No warning, no patience, no room for peace. The shock of it froze the moment. He tried to calm it immediately, raising his hands, apologizing, calling the man boss, trying to let the whole thing die there. But pride is a dangerous thing at night, especially in a club where everybody wants to look tough in front of everybody else. The stranger didn't care about the apology. He stepped away, went to call his own people, and from that point, everyone knew the matter had passed the level of simple misunderstanding. When the stranger came back, he didn't come back alone. Faces started gathering, shoulders brushing, eyes locking in with bad intention. Tension rose so quickly that there was barely time for words. The boys, not wanting their guy to look stranded, stepped forward too. Maybe that was loyalty, maybe that was pride, maybe it was just the unspoken rule among friends that once one person is in trouble, everybody enters it whether it makes sense or not. Voices grew louder, insults flew around, people pushed. The club that had been full of music and enjoyment just moments earlier began to feel smaller, tighter, heavier. Then, the first blows landed and the whole thing broke open. What followed was confusion inside the club. Chairs shifted, drinks spilled, bodies rushed in different directions, and bystanders either moved back in fear or leaned in to watch as if the whole thing were part of the entertainment. Some tried to separate it, but it had gone too far for that. The first clash burned hot and brief, the kind where everybody is angry but still half testing one another. Eventually, it broke apart, but not because peace returned. It broke apart because both sides still had unfinished pride. Outside was where they decided the real answer would come. When they got out, the air outside felt completely different from the club. The music was behind them now, replaced by voices, streetlight shadows, and the raw feeling of trouble.
One of the boys counted their numbers and said they should wait. There were 11 of them at that point, enough for courage to rise beyond wisdom. In moments like that, numbers can trick people into believing they are safe. So they waited outside the club, angry, breathing hard, convinced they had enough bodies to stand their ground. It felt like a decision made in strength, but it was really the kind of decision that only sounds smart in the heat of the moment. When the other side finally came out, there was barely any pause between seeing each other and attacking again. They closed the distance, and the second fight started even more violently than the first.
This time, it was no longer a rough argument or a few exchanged punches. It became total chaos. In the middle of the fighting, someone sprayed tear gas straight into one of the boy's eyes. Instantly, he staggered back, screaming, blinded by pain, his eyes burning as if fire had been pushed into them. He moved away from the fight, disoriented and furious, trying to save himself from the pain. Somewhere nearby, he found water and started washing his eyes, even though people warned him that it might make things worse. But he was beyond listening. Frustration had swallowed reason. All he cared about in that moment was relief, any kind of relief. And the whole scene of him stumbling around, angry, half blind, trying to force his eyes open while everybody shouted different advice became its own drama inside the larger madness. While he was dealing with the tear gas, the fight itself started shifting into something more dangerous. The problem with street fights is that they rarely stay balanced for long. What starts as one group against another can suddenly become a flood. New faces appeared, more men joined from nowhere. The people they were fighting seemed to multiply in the night, as though the night itself was producing reinforcements. That was when fear began to creep in. The boys who had felt bold a few minutes earlier started to sense that this had grown beyond control. And then it got worse. Someone removed the club's padlock and used it as a weapon. The sound of that kind of metal in the middle of a fight changes everything. It's not just a threat anymore. It means someone is ready to do real damage. They used the padlock to strike one of the boys, and the brutality of it shocked everyone. At that point, there was no more pretending this was ordinary club trouble. It had crossed into something that could leave permanent consequences. One of his closest guys tried to pull him out, grabbing him, trying to drag him away from the middle of the violence, trying to make him understand that pride was no longer worth defending there. But even getting out was not simple anymore. The gate was locked, tension was everywhere, and the people they had come with were no longer all standing together. Some of the same boys who had arrived had already disappeared, running for home the moment the heat became too much. That part hurt almost as much as the blows, because nothing stings like realizing in the middle of chaos that not everybody who came with you is truly built to stay with you. One of them, who never even knew how to fight in the first place, could only stand there in disbelief. He watched the whole thing like somebody trapped in a nightmare that wasn't his own. Every shout, every hit, every sudden movement only made it clearer that he was completely out of his depth. He hadn't come for battle. He had come to enjoy the night. But enjoyment had died hours ago, and survival had taken its place. When the chance finally opened, everyone who could escape chose movement over pride. Once running starts in a moment like that, the entire story changes again. Boys who had been standing like warriors seconds before suddenly became men fleeing for their lives.
They ran hard, not neatly, not bravely, just desperately. The pursuit stretched on far longer than anyone expected. The people chasing them kept coming, pushing the fear deeper into their bones with every footstep behind them. Their legs burned, their breathing turned ragged, and the road seemed endless. Some nearly stumbled, some kept looking back and almost lost speed. Nobody had the strength left for forming any kind of plan. It was pure instinct now, a desperate race powered by panic. In the middle of that wild pursuit, two local dogs started barking and disturbing them, as if the night itself had sent extra madness to mock them. One of the boys, already pushed beyond his limit, turned and angrily scolded the dogs as though they too were part of the enemy. Even in the middle of terror, there was something absurdly funny about it, the kind of detail that later makes people laugh until they remember how serious everything really was. But not everybody could keep up. One of them was completely finished. His legs had given him all they could, and fear had drained whatever remained. He could not run anymore. He felt himself slowing, breaking, fading behind the others, and in that kind of moment, the mind begins to imagine the worst before it even happens. He was lucky, though, in one of those strange ways that only make sense after the fact. He was wearing a soldier-style cap, and somehow that small detail helped him blend into the confusion enough to avoid the full attention of the people hunting them. It was the kind of accidental mercy people later point at as proof that God can use anything to save a person. While the others kept moving, some of them genuinely believed he might have been caught, maybe even killed. One of the boys said it aloud as they ran, and the fear in that statement made the whole thing feel even heavier. Eventually, the ones still running reached a filling station and ducked into safety there, hiding themselves, trying to steady their breathing, trying to gather their senses. By then, they were no longer thinking about fighting back. That spirit had died on the road. What remained was exhaustion, pain, and the urgent need to get home alive. So they called a friend who had left the club earlier before the trouble became a war. He was the smart one that night, the one who had escaped before the chaos reached its peak. When they called him, he didn't waste time. He came with his car and picked them up. And that ride back felt less like ordinary transport and more like rescue after a battlefield evacuation. By the next morning, the evidence of the night was impossible to ignore. One of them came back without the cap and shirt he had worn to the club, both lost somewhere in the confusion, the tear gas, the blows, and the escape. Another discovered that he had misplaced his AirPod during the pursuit. It almost sounded ridiculous compared to everything else, but that was exactly what made it memorable. After all the violence, one of the lasting losses was still a single missing AirPod. That detail sat beside everything else: the burning eyes, the bruises, the fear, the missing clothes, the exhaustion, and somehow made the whole story even more real. Nights like that don't just take your strength, they scatter pieces of you in different forms and leave you to count the losses in the morning.
As they told the story, they laughed at parts of it, argued over details, corrected one another, and mocked the people who had run early. That laughter wasn't because the night was light. It was because laughter is sometimes the only way people survive the memory of how close things came to becoming tragedy. Underneath the jokes was something more serious. The same night that had looked glamorous in videos, full of enjoyment and flexing, had nearly destroyed them. One accidental step on the wrong shoe had unfolded into slap, insult, fight, tear gas, padlock blows, betrayal, pursuit, and desperate escape. It was the kind of night that teaches hard lessons without warning. It showed them how quickly fun can collapse into violence, how pride can trap people longer than sense should allow, how some friends stand, some disappear, and some come through at the very last moment when rescue matters more than talk. And for the one who sat there the next morning hearing everything, it hit him in a different way. He had watched the club through streaks and videos, through bright lights and fake ease, thinking the boys were simply outside having the time of their lives. But now he saw the truth hidden behind the screen. What looks like enjoyment from a distance can be chaos up close. What looks like flexing can actually be survival in disguise. And sometimes the greatest blessing is the trouble you almost joined, but didn't. In the end, nobody really won that night. There was no champion, no glory, no real bragging rights. There were only boys who had gone out looking for fun and came back humbled by the madness they found instead. Still, they had made it home, and by the morning, that alone felt like enough.